It's time for the Week 8 tight end rankings. My name is Steve. I'll introduce myself a little bit early in this video. And before we get into the rankings, I am going to need to recap how I did last week in Week 7 with my DFS buys, which is something that you can catch my Week 8 DFS buys for at the end of this video, as well as how I did with my Lovums and my Fadeums for Week 7. You can find all of my rankings and my projections up on the website, www.theFFForge.com. There's a link down in the description. It's also right above my head if you forget what I just said. And you can find floors and ceilings as well up on the website, which you will not see up today. So what you are looking at over to the left of the names is a player temperature gauge. And just like over here, red is going to be good, blue tends to be bad, and white is just kind of neutral. And think of this as a matchup gauge. Is there a good chance that this player goes above or beyond this high projected range that I have for the player? Or maybe if it's in the blue, there's less of a chance of that happening. White, just think, yeah, there's probably a good chance that they'll land within this expected range. And as a reminder, I will be live 1.5 hours prior to the main kickoff slate on Sunday morning, so come on and join me then for any of your start-sit questions. Now, how did I do last week for my goodbyes for DFS? I said I would jump all over Dallas Goedert at 4,700 DK bucks. He finished as the tight end 5 with 18.7 PPR points. In the discount bin, I give you two names. They both got injured: Pat Freiermuth, Luke Musgrave. So, yeah, you know, they got disqualified from failing for me or succeeding. And as a contrarian play, I said that I doubted anyone would touch Hunter Henry at $4,100. My logic was just that this offense needed to get their tight ends going a little bit more. Again, that's when they had found the most success. And you know what? They did do that, essentially, here, because the tight ends of New England did get fantasy points. Unfortunately, Hunter Henry at tight end 22 had the least out of 3 tight ends there. Mike Gesicki ended as the tight end 14, and Pharaoh Brown ended as the tight end 16, both obviously outscoring him. Now, moving on to my love him, give you Luke Musgrave. He got injured in the game. It wasn't looking incredibly promising for a big day, although in full PPR, he might have ended up with 7-8 targets, and he was pretty much catching them all. They weren't too deep of targets. So he ended up as tight end 17.5 PPR in a day that he got injured. Who knows how that would have ended up. Probably wouldn't have ended up as a top 5 tight end, though. And for my Fadeum, I gave you Cole Kmet, and I went on a rant about his ranking via the expert consensus rankings, and thank God that that rant was vindicated. He scored as many fantasy points as I did in Week 7. Not a lot, right? Welcome in to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, yet again, still Steve, and what we're seeing right on the screen right now is my first tier, my must-start tight ends, which begins at tight end number 1 with Travis Kelce, followed by Mark Andrews, TJ Hockenson, Sam Laporta, Dallas Goedert, Darren Waller. We're able to add a couple, well, there's the next tier starting there. We're able to add a couple of names into this group with Dallas Goedert, Darren Waller. They've kind of gotten back into our good graces for this week at the very least. And so there's not much to say about them. If you have them, I think that you absolutely must start them. Let's move on to my second tier of tight ends, which starts off with Evan Ingram. And by the hair on his chinny chin, Evan Ingram just barely missed out on being one of the must-start options this week because the Steelers are the 3rd worst tight end matchup for tight ends. You're probably starting him, but the argument could be made that maybe you should start one of these guys if you happen to have them as well over him. I would buy into some of these arguments. So at tight end number 8, we have George Kittle in Cincinnati. Is a top 5 tight end matchup on a per game basis. And you have to think that with Brock Purdy being out, that was going to cause Kyle to try to scheme up something that is simple and in the sense that like it makes sense. And it makes sense to attack with your tight end against Cincinnati based on what we've seen so far this season. They have allowed, on a per-game basis, the 2nd most touchdowns to the tight end position. And at tight end 9, I have Dalton Schultz, and it's tough to ignore the high end on that expected range over here. it's as high or higher than all but 4 tight ends. On the other hand, the temperature gauge, all the way to the left of his name there, does not suggest that that it's really highly likely that he will have a higher end type of game here against Carolina. But we're talking about tight ends here, and at the end of the day, I'll take a ceiling if there is a ceiling there. And I definitely think that there is one there against Carolina. And that's going to bring us on to my third tier here. Just a couple of small tiers. You know, there's slight differences from the bottom of this tier to the top of this tier. Slight differences from the bottom of this tier to the top of this tier. But I think all in all, the top 12 that I have, I feel pretty confident about being top 12 tight ends as far as recommendations this week, going into the week. So for this third tier, tight end number 10, I have Kyle Pitts. And it's not a high-scoring matchup between Atlanta and Tennessee. At least, you know, the expectation is not that it will be a high-scoring matchup. And Tennessee has not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown yet on the entirety of the season. Yet, I kind of like Kyle Pitts this week. I have a feeling that Atlanta is going to need to pass more than they would prefer to. And unless something has changed, Pitts runs more of his routes from the outside or the slot than he does in line like a traditional tight end does, which means that Kyle Pitts is going to find more favorable matchups against this Tennessee defense than he probably would otherwise. I have decided to go out on a limb here, and I love Kyle Pitts. I have to let the world know that for 1 week, I love Kyle Pitts. There it is. And at tight end 11, we have Logan Thomas, and Philadelphia, as a tight end, is not a matchup that I would invite Taylor Swift to in hopes of impressing her. But Logan Thomas has still been a top 10 tight end over the course of the season, and I think that the opportunities will be there in this game for him against Philadelphia. I'm going to trust the overall field of work for Logan Thomas on the season. However, another down week and he will start to fall out of favor with me. So hopefully he can put one together, because we all know how tight ends work. He will have another down week, and as soon as I stop ranking him up here, he'll go off. That brings us to tight end number 12 with Jake Ferguson, and the Rams are a top 5 tight end matchup, and I don't think that it's too tough to imagine that this could be the week that the Dallas Cowboys offense looks the absolute best that it has all season long. That'll bring us to our fourth and final tier here. Once again, you can find the complete rankings up on the website at www.theFFForge.com if you need to see where I have some of the other tight ends ranked lower than this. But tight ends, 20 tight ends should get you through the week for the most part. But you might be curious about somebody else. Understood. Tight end 13, I have Taysom Hill, and I don't really like ranking him this high. And Juwan Johnson may be returning, so that could take everything that you saw last week and reverse it. But in addition to that, I know that the results of last week were different than the results of most weeks, but it's not like he was used drastically more than he was used in terms of how much he's on the field in other weeks. In fact, he was on the field less in week 7 than he was in week 6. That said, Indianapolis allows tight ends to get absolutely peppered with targets at the highest rate in the entire NFL. So I'm willing to ride with him for a week to see if some magic happens. Jonnu Smith I have in at tight end 14. He's been a stud, top 6 tight end so far this season. For the reasons that I listed, that I liked Kyle Pitts despite everything else in the game. So basically, because of everything else for that game, I don't really like Jonnu Smith this week. I think there's only enough room for one tight end to possibly produce, and I think that it's more likely in this matchup that Kyle Pitts would be the tight end to produce for this team. And that brings us to tight end 15 with Cole Kmet, and I can't really rank him any lower than this given the matchup going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, but I'm telling you not to fall for it. I'm fading him. I think that it is an absolute trap game for Cole Kmet. Still, there is plenty of upside in this matchup, so maybe it's a reverse trap game, a reverse Uno on all of us. Then at tight end 16, we have Dalton Kincaid, and well, he played last night already. Just a little bit going into last night's game, I would have been curious, and I was wondering, even doubtful, that his role would change at all, really, based on some of the surface level research that I did, just thinking of how they run their offense, etc. But I think that the biggest positive for Dalton Kincaid, which is a pretty big positive, would be that there's probably at least like a 10% increased chance that he would get a touchdown with Dawson Knox being out. So maybe that happened last night. I don't know. How did he do? And let's go on to tight end 17 with David Njoku. Njoku is a part of the game plan regardless of who is in at quarterback. And if Deshaun Watson does return and is playing quarterback and he's still lacking his arm strength, well, it's a lot easier to get the ball out to a tight end than it is to get the ball all the way out to the perimeters to one of your wide receivers. So that should work in favor of Njoku. And Seattle, the opponent, has been a bottom 5 defense for tight ends to face so far this season, but they have not allowed any touchdowns to them. And what does that mean? Well, it just means that part of the reason that they're in the bottom 5 is because they haven't allowed any touchdowns to them. When you look at the targets, the receptions, the yards, those other numbers, they're only a slightly below average tight end opponent. So I think that Njoku is a fine play. Then Gerald Everett I have in at tight end 18 there, and on a per game basis, the Bears have allowed the second most receptions to tight ends. It's that simple. Plus, there should be plenty of scoring opportunities going up against the Chicago Bears. And then Luke Musgrave I have in at tight end 19, and he may not play, but if he does play, he is a fine option. There's nothing exciting that I can really say about Luke Musgrave to try to sell you on him. The reason that you play Luke Musgrave is essentially because you feel comfortable that he's not going to lose you the week. He's going to get you those 7, 6.5 type of points most likely. And of course, you add a touchdown on top of that. That's half PPR scoring. You add a touchdown on top of that, and it looks a lot better. It's a good week then. And that's pretty common for tight ends, and Minnesota is not a scary defense, so I think that there would be an opportunity for that that's no less than any other tight end. That said, Denver was not a scary defense either, and that didn't go so well, though he was pacing all right. Moving on to tight end 20 here with Michael Mayer, and there's 0% chance that I would have him ranked this highly if it was not for the fact that he is facing the Detroit Lions, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to the tight end position on a per-game basis this season. I might move him ahead of Musgrave, but I expect him to just be ranked ahead of Musgrave because I expect to be not ranking Musgrave by the end of the week. I don't really think that Musgrave's going to play, so I'll probably let that decision figure itself out by the end of the week. Let's move on to my DFS buys for Week 8 of the NFL season. And for good buy, I actually have 2 names here. So first of all, Darren Waller at $5,200 I think is a good buy. I don't necessarily think that there were too many deals to find for the main Sunday slate of games, but I did like that one the most as far as upside and cost. It might be worth just paying up this week at tight end for a guy like Travis Kelce. Literally for Travis Kelce at 8,000 DK bucks is my thought for the tight ends. In the discount bin, Logan Thomas at $3,400 seems like a good go for me. And as a contrarian play at 3,900 DK bucks, I think most people are going to be looking past Dalton Schultz given some of the prices of guys below him and the matchup not being amazing, and then some of the guys above him. So I think that he's just going to be in this no man's land where a lot of people are. He's not going to be on people's radars, and that's what makes him a contrarian play. If you want to differentiate your lineup from others, that I think there's a good shot to take there with Dalton Schultz and that possible ceiling, even if it's not incredibly likely. That is it for the tight ends. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you have not done any of those yet. And I will give you an injury report on Saturday, and I'll be here 1.5 hours prior to kickoff on Sunday for all of your start-sit needs. Good luck this week in fantasy football. Peace out.